Imagine standing, right next to the most crystal clear, just infinite, pristine ocean you've ever laid eyes on.
Just absolute perfection.
Right. But instead of walking into those waters, you turn around, you walk over to a muddy puddle in the middle of the dirt road, and you just start frantically splashing around in it, expecting it to get you clean.
And the tragic irony there is that, well, the harder you splash in that puddle, the dirtier you actually get.
Yeah.
It is the absolute definition of a counterproductive effort. Like, the physical exertion is very real, but the result is the exact opposite of what you want.
Which raises the question, why do human beings constantly choose the mud over the ocean? Today, we're extracting the answer to that from a really profound piece of spiritual literature. We are diving into a composition by Guru Nanak Dev Ji, written in Rag Dhanaasaree.
It's such a rich, layered text.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this ancient, deeply psychological roadmap that maps out the trap of the human ego, and more importantly, the actual mechanics of how to step out of that puddle.
Because that's what we all want to know, right?
Yeah.
How to get out.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. The text sets up a contrast right out of the gate using two very distinct birds. On one hand, you have the guru, described as an ocean filled with pearls.
Right.
And those who are spiritually awakened, the saints or gurmukh, they're described as swans.
Yeah, the swan is a really classic metaphor in this tradition.
Oh.
And the word gurmukh literally translates to one who is facing the guru, or, facing the light.
Right.
These swans gather ambrosial nectar from this ocean of pearls. They taste the subtle essence of the Lord, and they never stray far from it. It's the state of total, serene abundance. They know exactly where their nourishment comes from, and they don't waste energy, looking for it anywhere else.
But then we get to the other bird. The text introduces the crane, and I love this. It literally calls it the poor crane, and asks what this crane can possibly accomplish by bathing in a mud puddle.
Yeah, it's almost a rhetorical question.
Right, because it says the crane sinks into the mire, and its filth is not washed away. And I really want to ground this because it's a beautiful metaphor, but I need to understand what this looks like in our actual lives.
Sure.
What is the mud actually representing here? And why on earth are we drawn to it if the ocean is literally right next to us?
What's fascinating here is that the mud puddle represents the illusion of duality and the trap of the ego.
Duality. Okay, break that down for me.
So in spiritual terms, duality is the belief that you are entirely separate from the universe. It's that mindset of, I am me, the world is outside of me, and I have to fight it, control it, or manipulate it just to survive.
Oh man, that sounds exhausting.
It is. When the text talks about duality, it means seeking support or security from temporary worldly things rather than the true guru or the formless Lord.
So if I'm understanding this, the mud is basically the illusion of control.
Yes.
It's thinking I can secure my own happiness if I just, get the right job or the right status, or if I just micromanage my life perfectly.
That is the absolute core of it. The crane is splashing in the mud, which represents just going through the motions of life driven by ego.
Just constantly hustling.
Exactly. It could be chasing material wealth, or even performing empty religious rituals just to look pious, or constantly trying to assert dominance over others. And the crazy part is, the crane actually believes this activity is getting it clean.
It thinks the mud is helping.
Right. It believes all this hustle will eventually lead to peace. But the text points out the structural flaw in this strategy, which is you cannot wash off mud with more mud.
Wow, yeah.
Operating from a place of pure ego, operating on the assumption that I alone am the doer, it only generates more anxiety. You just sink deeper into the mire of your own restless thoughts.
Wait, I'm kind of stuck on that. Because if the puddle is the ego and splashing harder just adds more mud, we're in a paradox here.
Very much so.
We can't work our way out of it because the work itself is often driven by the ego. So what is the alternative mechanism? How does a person actually step out of the mud?
Well, the text provides a very specific mechanism for this transition. It says that a thoughtful person takes a step only after careful deliberation.
Careful deliberation.
Yeah, this is the pivot. It requires highly conscious action.
Let's spend a second on careful deliberation, because that sounds like a cognitive process, not just a spiritual one.
Oh, it is entirely cognitive. Careful deliberation means breaking that automatic stimulus response cycle of the ego.
Okay.
The crane splashes reflexively, right? But the swan pauses. To get out of the puddle, you have to actively observe your own mind. You have to notice, oh, I am grasping for control again. I am seeking validation from a temporary source again.
So it's about catching yourself in the act.
Exactly. By pausing, you create a gap between your impulse and your action. And in that gap, you can choose to forsake duality. You consciously stop relying on the temporary and turn your attention to the formless Lord, the Nirankar.
It's almost like realizing you're driving in the wrong direction, and instead of just, hitting the gas pedal harder.
Hoping you'll magically end up at the right destination.
Right, you actually pull the car over and turn off the engine.
That pause changes everything. And the text tells us that the result of this conscious pivot is that the devotee obtains the treasure of liberation and their comings and goings end.
Now, the phrase comings and goings, that usually refers to the cycle of reincarnation, birth, and death in Eastern philosophy, right?
Yes, traditionally.
But psychologically, for us, today, right now, does that also apply to our internal state?
Without a doubt. Think about the daily comings and goings of a restless mind.
Oh, yeah.
The constant swinging between hope and despair, past regrets and future anxieties. That exhausting mental pacing. When you engage in careful deliberation and seek the true guru, that internal pacing stops. The guru protects the devotee from that relentless cycle.
Okay, this actually brings up a line that completely threw me when I was reviewing the source material.
Which one?
It describes a symbiosis between the swan and the ocean. It says, the swans are in the pool, and the pool is in the swans.
Ah.
And I'm really struggling with the physics of this metaphor. Like, the swan being in the pool makes sense. But how does an ocean get inside a bird? What is the text trying to tell us about how this wisdom actually functions?
Think of it less like a physical place and more like an internal operating system.
Okay.
The pool isn't a geographical location you visit. It represents divine wisdom and truth. When you truly engage in loving devotional worship and honor the guru's word, the boundary between you, the seeker, and the truth you are seeking begins to dissolve.
Wow.
You don't just understand the wisdom intellectually anymore. It becomes the lens through which you view all of reality.
So it's not something you reference in a book, it's something you are.
Precisely. The text describes this internalized state as speaking the unspoken speech, or asaTapadheeaa.
Unspoken speech, that sounds like a riddle.
It does, but it highlights the limits of human language. I mean, how do you describe the taste of salt to someone who has never had it?
You can't.
Exactly. You can only experience it. asaTapadheeaa refers to a state of profound internal realization and peace that words simply cannot capture. When the pool is in the swan, the wisdom is fully integrated. You no longer need to run around looking for external puddles of validation because the source of peace is generating from within you.
But if this wisdom becomes an internal operating system, what happens if we fail to install it? Because the text lays out some serious cosmic stakes here. It introduces a figure called the Primal Lord, referred to as the yogi, sitting in the celestial sphere of deepest samadhi.
Let's unpack samadhi for a moment because it's crucial here.
Yeah, please.
Samadhi isn't just, sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed. It is a state of profound, undisturbed equilibrium and ultimate consciousness. It's called the sun mandal, the sphere of absolute stillness. And the text describes this primal lord in ways that deliberately break our human frameworks.
How so?
Well, it says this lord is not male and he is not female.
So it's entirely beyond our biological or social categories.
Yes. It is the ultimate formless reality, the Nirankar. The light of this formless Lord is what the three worlds center their attention on. This Lord is the source of ultimate bliss, the support of the helpless, and the destroyer of fear. To meet this Lord, the text says, one must subdue the ego. That is the ultimate sanctuary.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the contrast is the fate of those who refuse to subdue the ego. Stanza 6 of the text shows us what happens to those stuck in duality, and it is a severe warning.
It really is.
It says that despite making many efforts, the individual is tortured by the messenger of death. They're destined only to die, wasting their precious human life, trapped by doubt, and this is a direct quote, they cry out in pain.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the psychology of a wasted life. Notice how it specifically says this person makes many efforts.
Yes, this is what I want to zero in on. It doesn't say this person is lazy or sitting on the couch doing nothing. They're trying incredibly hard.
This is modern hustle culture defined perfectly in an ancient text. You can work 60 hours a week. You can optimize your daily routine down to the minute, accumulate wealth, build an empire. You are making massive efforts. But if all of those efforts are rooted in the illusion of duality, if you are just trying to build a fortress to protect your ego, You're still in the mud puddle. You are just splashing furiously.
It's like running a marathon, pushing your body to the absolute limit, only to realize at mile 26 that you were running in the complete opposite direction to the finish line.
Exactly.
The exhaustion is real, but the progress is zero.
And that realization is the crying out in pain. You expend your entire life force only to be met by the messenger of death, which sure can be understood literally as the end of life, but also metaphorically as the constant daily death of your peace of mind through anxiety and exhaustion. True relief only comes from seeking the sanctuary of the true Lord. All other efforts are fundamentally futile.
So we're exhausted, we're covered in mud, and we're running the wrong way. The stakes are massive. So how do we actually turn around? Because we need a practical solution to achieve this internal purity. The text advises us to speak, read, and hear of the one Lord, and then it introduces this concept of the fourth state, or asaTapadheeaa. So what are the other three states, and what is this fourth one?
So in classical Eastern thought, human consciousness is generally divided into three normal states: waking, dreaming, and deep, dreamless sleep.
Okay.
Or you can look at it through the lens of the three gunas, or qualities of nature, which are creation and passion, preservation and routine, and destruction or lethargy. We spend our entire lives just kind of bouncing between these states.
Even by impulses, desires, and fatigue.
Yes. But the fourth state, asaTapadheeaa, is the underlying witness consciousness. It transcends all of those worldly impulses. It is the state of being completely centered in the divine, observing the world without being hooked by it.
So what does this all mean for our daily actions? The text mentions that in this fourth state, chastity, purity, and self-restraint, referred to as jat, sat, and sanjam, are infused into the heart. How does that actually work mechanically? Because when most of us hear words like chastity or self-restraint, we think of strict rules. We think of white-knuckling our way through life, aggressively fighting our natural urges just to be a quote-unquote good person.
And white-knuckling is really just another form of ego.
Is it?
Think about it. Look how disciplined I am. Look how hard I am fighting my desires. That is still the crane fighting the mud. What this text reveals is something entirely different. It says these qualities are infused into the heart when the mind reaches the fourth state through the guru's shabad, or word.
So hearing or reading the word actually changes the environment of the mind.
Yes. Think about how sound and frequency work in the physical world. If you walk into a room and aggressive, chaotic music is playing, your heart rate elevates. You feel tense, even if you aren't actively trying to.
Yeah, you just absorb the energy.
Exactly. If the music shifts to something harmonious and slow, your nervous system naturally downregulates. The guru's shabad works on the frequency of the mind. When you immerse yourself in it, it alters your baseline consciousness.
So you don't have to force yourself to be calm. The environment simply makes panic impossible.
That's beautifully put. When you enter asaTapadheeaa, the desire for the mud just naturally falls away. You don't have to use self-restraint to avoid the mud puddle because you no longer have any appetite for it. The text says that in this state, people become immaculate and true, and filth does not stick to them.
Filth does not stick. That is such a profound shift in perspective. You aren't battling the dirt anymore. You've simply elevated yourself to an altitude where the mud cannot even reach you.
Exactly.
It completely reframes what spiritual practice actually is. It's not a fight, it's an elevation.
It is the ultimate freedom from fear and doubt.
Which brings us to the conclusion of the composition, which is an incredibly moving image. After explaining the cosmos, the psychology of the ego, and this elevated fourth state, Guru Nanak Dev Ji himself concludes by begging for the Lord, the embodiment of truth, whose form is incomparably beautiful.
This raises an important question about the nature of seeking truth. It grounds everything we just talked about. Because even with all this profound wisdom, the composition ends with an act of begging. Nanak asks for the truth. It serves as a reminder that no matter how much spiritual vocabulary we acquire or how much we understand the mechanics of the mind, the ultimate posture of a true seeker is deep humility.
Right.
The moment your ego says, I understand the fourth state, I have arrived, you are right back in the mud puddle. You must constantly ask for the truth rather than letting your ego convince you that you own it.
Humility as the final key to the ocean. That puts everything into perspective. We've gone from the tragic, frantic splashing of the crane and the puddle of duality, learning that we have to break our automatic reactions with careful deliberation. We explored how the ocean of wisdom actually becomes our internal operating system, protecting us from the endless anxiety of our own minds. And we saw that by tuning into the Guru's word, we can reach an elevated state where the filth of the world simply slides right off us.
It's a complete transformation.
As you go about your day, I want you to think about the friction in your own life. Look at the efforts you are making, the calendars you are organizing, the validation you are chasing. Are those efforts gathering pearls in a boundless ocean of wisdom? Or are you just splashing around in a mud puddle, hoping the exhaustion will eventually make you clean? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep stepping with careful deliberation, and we'll catch you next time.